Their assignment was to take a book that chronicles one of history's more controversial characters and turn it into a TV series. And by the way, they did it flawlessly. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I'm extremely excited to have with me today co-writer and co-creator of the series, Mark Richard, to talk about his WGA-nominated TV show, The Good Lord Bird. And wow, what a pleasure it was to watch The Good Lord Bird. I mean, this is a very entertaining television show, but it is feeding you real history in a very digestible fashion to the point that you just can't wait to see what happens next. And sometimes you cannot believe your eyes, in which some of the stranger parts of history are the truer parts. Of course, it goes without saying that some of the themes of racism that are observed in the show, just as they plagued the nation way back then, still plague the nation now, which makes The Good Lord Bird even more relevant as a great piece of television. And John Brown is such an amazing character to chronicle. Ethan Hawke did just a brilliant job with his depiction of John Brown, his writing of John Brown in this adaptation. And, you know, look, I cannot say enough good things about this show. And I want to say, even if you have not yet seen The Good Lord Bird, you could still definitely listen to the non-spoiler section and understand everything we're talking about. And you'll probably understand most of the spoiler section as well. But look, if you could get it through Showtime and you could watch The Good Lord Bird, I highly recommend it. It completely deserved its WGA nomination for television. It's just got some excellent writing in it. Without a doubt, Mark was an excellent guest who had a lot of interesting things to say about his creative process and what it took to make this show. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, you could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. You know, one of the things that we're doing in Backstory Magazine is we're getting screenplays out there that are unproduced by writers of note. In this issue, you could see Simon Kinberg's first screenplay that he sold right out of college, and also a Joe Carnahan screenplay that he wrote with his brother, Matthew Michael Carnahan, that he's been trying to make for a decade. He even gave us concept art. You could read both of those entire screenplays and interviews with the screenwriters about how they would see them as a movie and the lessons that they learned writing them. I hope you check out our table of contents over at backstory.net. And, you know, even if you've never read us, you could test drive us by reading the free issue. You could read an entire issue over there. And if you like us, I hope you'll consider subscribing. And you could save $5 off your subscription with coupon code SAVE5. That's save and the number 5. You enter at backstory.net. It'll give you access on your desktop or laptop, or you could use those same credentials to sign into your iPad app as well. But look, it would mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and YouTube watchers support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with co-creator and co-writer Mark Richard about his television show, The Good Lord Bird. Okay, Mark, it's fantastic to see you. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having us on the show.
Well, I'm really excited because honestly, I was completely in awe watching The Good Lord Bird, and I was so glad that it got WGA nominated. It truly deserves it. What you guys did is so innovative. And you know, the first part of the interview obviously is going to be non-spoiler. We're going to give our viewers on YouTube and our listeners and Spotify and iTunes just a sense of who you are and where you come from. So I think my easiest question is, at what point in your life did you know that you wanted to be a filmmaker?
Well, it's not an easy answer. I spent a lot of time in our movie theater house in my little town. The projectionist lived on my street, and he would walk to the theater. It's a very small southern town. And
where was it, Mark?
In Franklin, Virginia, in Southampton County. And if I went with him to help open up the theater, I could watch the movies for free. Although I had to sit up in what they called then the colored balcony, which tells you a lot about our town.
Right.
But that was also where the party was often, you know. So, but I didn't really, I made a couple of films in college, but I didn't ever really consider a career in filmmaking.
Where'd you go to school?
Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. which are undergoing a lot of agonizing questions about whether or not to keep their name or to change their name. Both.
Yes, I was there once. There once. It's far outside city limits would be the way to describe that place. I was there in my 20s with a friend that went there, and we went to visit him. And I'm Jeff Goldsmith. That's the way I was born and raised. But I was definitely Jeff. I was Jeff Smith in that little town because I couldn't get a read on it. It
was, a very small private college, and you had to wear a coat and tie to class. And, I grew up in a public school in the county, and I show up in bib overalls listening to the Allman Brothers, and, these guys are listening to beach music and, come from all this money. And I never really, you find your own little clique. So I found a bunch of guys who they didn't fit in either, but I got a great education. The teachers were really good, small classes. And I had some good writing teachers, including Jim Boatwright, who was the editor of Shenandoah magazine, because Shenandoah is a literary magazine from W&L. And then I just kind of I goofed around, and I had misspent 20s. I worked on commercial fishing boats for 3 years. I sold real estate. I sold seafood, sold driftwood. I was a newspaper reporter, naval correspondent for the Norfolk Virginia pilot paper. And writing was something I could do, but it wasn't like creative writing wasn't it. But then about that time, minimalist writers were making a heyday, Raymond Carver, people like that. And I was always reading. And I would read their stories and I go, you know what? I'm not better than this, but I can write at least as well as this, I think. So I started sending stories to Esquire magazine, which was a good place to publish at the time. And they reject them, send them back. But I'd say, okay, they would edit them to give me notes. And I go, I'll just write you another one. So I kept sending them. And finally, one of the editors was driving through to the Outer Banks. He says, I want to meet this crazy person who sends us a new story every week and refuses to edit his stories because he's on deadline for ship of the week, So he came down and he said, if you really want to be a writer, and I think it was true at the time, that you had to move to New York. New York, this was in the 80s. That was the nexus of publishing. Okay. So I started there and, published some books, became more of I was a journalist, wrote for Esquire, the New York Times, 7 Days magazine, all those great, it was a heyday. It was the last golden days of magazine publishing, really. And then I became an academic, taught, left New York after about 10 years and went back to the South. And I hadn't been in the South in a long time. And I went to the University of the South, Sewanee, where I was a Tennessee Williams Fellow. And there was a county nearby called Grundy County, which was like, I didn't know it, but I found out quickly, 100% white and big KKK stronghold. If you go to swap meets there, it was all like KKK cigarette lighters, just Nazi memorabilia. You've seen these places, Jeff.
Unfortunately, yes, I have.
And, it kind of struck me. I was going, man, I hadn't been in the South in, 10 or 15, 20 years, but nothing's really changed. And after that, I went to the University of Mississippi, and it was even worse in the Delta. Oxford, Mississippi is this little gem of progressive thinking and progressive people. But you go out in the Delta, it's 1950, still. So I was shocked by all this, really. And then when I was there, I married a woman who was from LA, and we moved out here. And she was writing a biography of her father. And I met a woman in Oxford who turned out, she was in the writing program there. It turned out she was Robert Altman's script supervisor.
Oh, wow.
She never told us that in Oxford. And we got out here and we kept in touch. She said, Bob wants me to write a script for him, and I don't know how to write. And I said, Ann, her name's Ann Rapp. I said, Ann, you're a really good writer. This shouldn't be hard. She said, I don't know what to do. I said, well, I'll help you break it out at least. I don't know how to write screenwriting either. Excuse me. So we broke it out. She wrote the script. Altman made the film. It was called Cookie's Fortune. And she said, I can't pay you. I can't give you credit, but I can introduce you to Bob. I was going, introduce me to Bob, Robert Altman, one of my heroes of all time. So I went to meet Bob, and he was in his office in Santa Monica, having a margarita in the afternoon, maybe a little weed in the air, whatever. And one of his assistants had read my first book of short stories called The Ice at the Bottom of the World. And there's a story in there about a sea captain who comes home to die. It's a large ensemble cast, strong female leads. And she said, she gave it to Altman and said, this would be a good film. So he read it, and he told me, he said, this could be a good script for me. I like this story. So I went back. My wife and I were living in a cottage in Palos Verdes. No money. We'd been married about a year. She was pregnant. So I went to the library and just got all those, remember VHS cassettes. I found the ones that I could find in the library with a matching script. So I would go home and watch the film and then read the script. And so that's how I taught myself how to write. So I adapted my story. It was like 140-page script, which is a tiny bit long, and I bring it in there like this. And Altman read it. He said, Mark, this is really good, and it'll probably be my next film. But you got to remember, you got to leave something for the director and the actors to do. I went, great. I'm off to the races. This Hollywood is easy, man. So then, unfortunately, he died. So, which was just, on so many levels, what a shock. But the script started getting around.
Wait a minute. Because Altman died before the Blacklist had come out, really, I thought. So years later, it made the Blacklist?
I don't remember it, but I know that it was on one of those lists of things to read.
Right.
So I don't know. I can't remember.
It was probably on a list of best unproduced screenplays.
Something like that. Yeah. I'm probably mixing up it was a long time ago. So, but I got an agent off of it, and I went back to Arizona State and was teaching, and I got a call from some producers who wanted me to write for TV, and I'd never written for TV before. It was Chris Kaiser and Amy Lippman had a show called Party of Five.
Right. I was going to ask about that because that's your first produced credit. It
was, and I just had my hip replaced. I was in the hospital. I was all drugged up. I took the call, and I was just like, I thought it was a half-hour sitcom set in a Jamaican diner. That's how stupid I was. So I said, no, I don't want to do this. I hung up. Fortunately, my surgical nurse was in the room, and she was going, that's one of my favorite shows. And she said, you're going to that interview. So my wife went and got this khaki suit. It's the only suit I had.
See, kids, don't do drugs because you might miss that one phone call that
you might miss that one. And I was still heavily narcotic, and the surgical nurse said, here's some crutches. I'll show you how to use them. And they put me on an airplane, took me in a rented ambulance, took me to Southwest Airlines, flew me out here. I had the meeting, which I have no memory of. And I remember I sweat completely through the khaki. A khaki suit is not something to sweat. It's kind of obvious when you sweat completely through a khaki suit.
Right.
And, but I got the job. Chris and Amy were very, they're literate people, and they're the type of people who they want a published author or short. They want one of those types of writers in the room, even if they don't have an experience, just for ideas or whatever. So I started doing that. Kind of gave up on academia. I thought what they were offering me the weekly salary that I thought they were talking about was what I was going to make in a semester, at ASU. So I said, right. Well, dang, so that's kind of how I got started. It's kind of a twisted tale.
Well, so, just briefly, this is eye-opening for you, and I got to go back for a second. What is the status of the screenplay that Altman liked? Is it still banging around out there? Could it one day be made?
It's a great question. It banged around for years. I think almost every director who was current at the time saw it. In fact, Alan Pakula, he had it in his car when he was killed on the LIE.
Oh my God!
He was going to do it. Jay Russell was going to do it. Ultimately, we had so many people were going to do it. Stephen Frears.
Wow.
Then Charlize Theron bought it, and I went around with her for, I don't know, several months trying to set it up. And I began to realize that a lot of these guys just wanted to meet Charlize, frankly,
Yeah.
And then we got Kim Pierce on board at one point. Then there was some falling outs, and I don't know. And then, it's still, Charlize still has it, and people ask me about it. But for me personally, I think that there's certain works that you do that you can burn out. And I've just encouraged everybody, let's just put it on the shelf. It got me where I wanted to be. It was a ticket. It was an entree to this business. I made money off of it from the sale, the options and stuff. I'm happy to move on. What I did learn, though, Jeff, is that it was one of my least successful stories in the book. And then when I wrote the screenplay, I fixed it. And I was going, this is interesting to me, So I didn't mean to interrupt you. What were you going to say?
No. I was just going to say that, I published a magazine called Backstory, and we have a section called Off the Shelf of screenplays that are unproduced by writers of note that we focus on, we publish in their entirety. I think I'm going to have to talk to you about this one after the interview, because that's exactly what we do.
It's exactly. Her property. There's been so many incarnations. We had,
we'll talk about it later, but tell me this on Party of Five, what was, your most eye-opening moment? Because here you are on in a writer's room, like on television, which is very tight deadlines. So you are definitely thrown into the mix. What was really eye-opening about your first television experience for you?
I had a great mentor on the show, John Romano, who was the showrunner. And I remember I turned in my first script, and it was like, I've since then seen Faulkner scripts where it's just like a column of black down the middle of the page. It's all just dialogue, with no, and
right.
I kind of turned in something similar where it's just like so many people just, 5-minute things. And he wrote in the margin, he went, "This is gorgeous, beautiful writing. Now make it worse."
That's a hilarious note. I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, it was great. And John, I learned a lot from him. There was an actor who wouldn't come out of his trailer. John would come down to my office. I had the shitty office, and he would come down and go, come watch how I do this. So I learned a lot about the industry.
Wait. Finish that story, Mark. Come on. How did he get the actor out of the trailer? You don't have to name names, but what did he do to coax the actor out of the trailer?
He asked the actor if he wanted to be in a coma. It's that old trick. He said, "You know what? How about you have a head injury and you're in a coma, and then you're in the bed under the hot lights, and you can't sit, and people come and talk to you, and you're just like in a coma. And maybe for the rest of the season, you're in a coma." And I thought, that's pretty good,
That's great, because it's not a physical threat of violence. It's a writing threat of violence of what will happen to your character if you don't leave your trailer. I absolutely love it.
Come out of the writer's room legitimately,
All right. Well, so we have so much to discuss with the good Lord Bird, but I just have one other question, because I know that recently you've done a lot of other TV writing, and you worked on the last season of The Man in the High Castle. And yeah. I actually really respected that anyone tried to do an adaptation of that. I'm a longtime Philip K. Dick fan, and I'm just curious. And if you haven't seen it, or if you're in the middle of it for some reason, it came out in 2019, but press pause for a second, or skip forward about 2 minutes, because I'm going to talk about a spoiler. I'm curious if in the last season you guys ever considered this one element in which Philip K. Dick in real life was really troubled writing The Man in the High Castle, because he said it brought his mind to dark places, especially being in the places of the Nazi occupiers of the United States. Not so much the Japanese forces, but it was dark for him as well, because they're occupying the United States. And the book won a Nebula Award, and it was very prestigious. And he was thinking about doing a sequel. And he actually wrote the first chapter of the sequel, which has been published in one of the books of Philip K. Dick's notes and letters. And I was curious if the show ever entertained that idea, in which basically they realized that there could be an alternate universe. The Nazis, they realized there could be an alternate universe where the United States wins World War II. And they're just scared at that idea. And they think they've figured out a way to break through to that universe. And their goal is to go arm their fellow Nazi comrades so that they could win World War II, basically in our universe. And that's the opening chapter. And he decided that concept was so dark that he was never going to go anywhere with it. And my curiosity for the show, sorry about this long-winded question, towards the end, was that ever discussed as a way to keep the show going? Because it was actually what Philip K. Dick was going to try and do.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that.
Okay.
I think that when I came on the last season, they'd kind of blown out the writers' room. There was like maybe one or two other people who'd been on the show from the beginning, who were lifesavers, because I was one of the bagmen writers on that show, and we had no idea where they were going, and neither did they in some ways. And they gave us the history. I think there was a sense of urgency on that show in the final season to wrap it up. Okay. Because it had gotten so diffuse and amorphous that we needed to get to the end of the story. And it was a lot of fatigue on that show. I mean, it's a very expensive show. And it was dark. I mean, I know we shot up in Vancouver, and I'd go up there for, my episode. I'd go to the cafeteria, and you see all these guys in Nazi uniforms. I got to tell you, it's creepy. It is so creepy. Yeah. And the whole thing was just spooky. So I think there was a sense to let's finalize this show. I never heard any discussions. It could have been over my head.
Sure.
Of a second season.
No, that's fascinating. They really nailed kind of the concept, though, for sure, of what would America look like taken over like Germany post World War II, occupied half by the Japanese and half by Germany, with kind of that middle line being pushed by both sides in their Cold War. So, they definitely accomplished that. All right. Well, so getting to today's film, which is today's TV show, which is WGA nominated. When did you first come aware of The Good Lord Bird, James McBride's book?
A fellow named Jeremy Gold at Blumhouse he and I had worked together for 5 years when I was like kind of head writer of Hell on Wheels. And, I love Westerns. I love morality tales, especially complicated morality tales. And Jeremy Gold sent the book to me, and I read it in a Sunday afternoon. I read it. And then Monday I called him up and I said, so what's the deal with this book? I would love to be in. He said, well, Jeremy's going, well, just happenstance. Ethan Hawke has it, and he's coming into town, I think, the next weekend. So we had a brunch that went all afternoon. We got along really well, which is another weird story because we had to have our psychological profiles made for diversity, and they matched. It was like this. We were like two different versions of the same person, which kind of flipped his wife out. I'll tell you, we can talk about that. Anyway, Ethan had such passion for it, and it resounded with me because of the issues of race. Growing up in a small southern town it's either black or white, and my parents were mixed, so it was not. I was on the outside, sort of looking in at the stuff, which is good for a writer, but it took us a long time to be accepted in the community. His passion for it and the source material was extraordinary. And then he said, you got to meet James McBride. So I went up to New York, and Ethan was... And
Mark, just to clarify, at this point, Ethan Hawke owned the rights, and he was looking for someone to partner with.
Right.
He had an option. Okay.
I think they'd met, writers and everything. I mean, I wasn't.
But it was Ethan Hawke that had the option, not Blumhouse.
Ethan. I think Ethan had it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
But just know that Blumhouse is run by Jason Blum, who is Ethan's old buddy from college days. They've had theater together. So I think it was like Ethan had it, Jason was going to help him get it.
Got it. I did not know that connection. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. I mean, Jason was, kind of fearless in this regard. So Ethan was starring in True West at that time. This was like a couple of years ago. So I came up to see him, had a house seat. The guy comes and sits next to me and we start talking. Of course, it's James McBride. It's a blind date that, Ethan has arranged. So the three of us go out afterwards and then we get along like a house on fire. We go bar hopping around the bars that are this is pre-COVID in New York. And we just had a lot in common, James and I did. His mom is from a little town 30 miles from where I grew up. And we're both active in small Black churches. I'm a deacon in a small Black church in my town.
Really?
He's a deacon in in a small Black church in Brooklyn. And we know the dramas of, it's like James says, he says, there's more fun and action in a Black church than in a bar. And it's true. I mean, it's lively. There's drama. There's all sorts of intrigue and stuff like that. So that's how I got involved in it. And then Ethan and I sat down and, had to do the hard work of doing the format doc, breaking the book down into sections. I mean, James was an EP, but, it was us.
Right. And I'll get there in a second. I just want to talk about something that's a trend that's been going on that I think really made room for this. There's been a trend lately, especially, and by lately, I mean like the last 5 or 6 years, of taking historical dramas and giving them a modern edge while still staying very valid within history, but changing the dialogue a little. Movies like The Favorite certainly opened up the path for that. And then even something, honestly, like I, Tonya, which, shouldn't have been the masterpiece that it was. But I, Tonya really showed you what you could do with a biopic, right? Like it restructured that in a way. And obviously TV's The Great recently, which came out, when you guys came out, same thing, was influenced by The Favorite. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that, about kind of doing a historical drama that is self-aware in a modern perspective.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good distinction, Jeff, because what we had to convince the studio and the network of, after they bought it, everybody wanted to buy it. Then they bought it and they're going, oh God, what have we bought? It's not a biopic. It's not a historical documentary. It's a Huck Finn novel. It's a tall tale. And if you look at it that way, then you lose the shackles of the biopic world. This book is a story told through the lens of a young boy who has to wear a dress and is mixed race. So that now we're in a whole different realm. It's a tall tale. And that gave us a lot more freedom. But then the challenge was two things. The tone, you had to have the tone because he doesn't know what he's witnessing. He's just young. And the second challenge was it's so much interior. It's like it's an interior novel. Right. How do you dramatize an interior? It's a ongoing problem for writers. So McBride was an anchor from which I swung, on this because I would go, dude, I'm thinking this, and he was going, go with God, man, just do it. So I don't ever felt like we were, as long as we remembered that Onion was the main character and we were telling it through his eyes, we were okay. And people go, well, how do we know that? And I go, well, the voiceover is a clue. Right.
The voiceover is definitely a clue. And we'll get to your writing process in a second, but let's talk about Onion for a second. Tell us what the historical significance of Onion was and your decision, obviously, to translate that from the book. Because as you just said, what's perfect about this is that Onion is a fish out of water character coming into this new world of John Brown. So the audience is able to easily identify with a protagonist like that. They have a way into the world and they kind of only know what Onion knows. and they only become an expert as Onion becomes an expert in John Brown's world. So there's a lot of good reasons to have that concept. If you're going to do a movie about somebody, you know, as explosive and wild as John Brown, taking a character on the sidelines and making them the protagonist is a great way to experience the world. What else could you tell us about Onion, historically, factual, etc.?
You know, that's probably a better question for James, but I think that Onion emblemized for me when I was working on his character, and I'd had long conversations with James about this. One of the first things that I noticed in the book was that the black characters in the book immediately recognized him as a boy in a dress.
Right. I was going to talk about that later.
And the white people just thought he was like a girl in a, you know, dirty dress. Significant to me because that told me that black people understood the struggle that every black person had to endure to live their life day by day. And if you have to wear a dress, wear a dress. White people see him as a non-person, see him as property. You know, it's just, if it's wearing a dress, it must be a girl, you know, and that helped me, you know, the perspective, then this perspective of both the races helped me, you know, develop Onion as a character. And he doesn't know. I mean, he's very ignorant of the world. He's innocent. And that was part of the fun, was just like revealing the world to him. And often the stuff that's being revealed to him is wrong or just, you know, inaccurate. So I don't know. It's a character construct. That's a good McBride question, I guess. I don't know. I think it's genius.
Did you do any historical research on the character of Onion? Because there was a real person, correct?
I think that there were several. I mean,
or is it a composite?
People, yeah. I think James had some. You know, James did tons of research. There have been people all along who've, you know, either passed for a boy or passed as a girl. I think he pulled some of that out. I mean, he's a tenacious researcher, so I wouldn't be surprised. We didn't have a conversation about it per se because we were under the gun, man. They told us like in March to start shooting in June, and we had no script. Yeah, it's like, so it wasn't like we could have a lot of leisurely conversations about these things. We just had to hit the ground running.
Well, I mean, even if it's a fictional device completely, you know, Onion is a great way into the world, and you could use composites, and it's hilarious because, I mean, right off in your pilot, it gets that tone in which, you know, nobody tells John Brown he's wrong. And when John Brown asks Henry what's his name and, you know, would he come with him, he says Henry Ann, and like as he says Henry Ann, like John Brown cuts him off and starts calling him a girl because he thinks he said Henrietta.
Right.
So it's just funny that, you know, he perpetuates that. Let's talk about your writing process for a second. You know, the craft of adaptation is difficult, as you said, taking internal voices and externalizing them. Tell us about that process of sitting down with Ethan Hawke to get through the book, because I know that you co-created the show. I know that Ethan did some writing on the show, obviously, as well. And he knew that he was he knew he was going to be the protagonist. I'd interviewed Ethan before about his writing for, you know, the Before Midnight movies and obviously The Hottest State, which he wrote and directed. So I know Ethan takes writing very seriously. Tell us about your collaboration for breaking down the book into a 7-part, you know, TV series.
Well, we came at it from different angles, which was great. I mean, we both read everything we could find about John Brown, every book. But Ethan also, he took it a step further. He went up to Lake Placid. He visited the John Brown homesteads. He retraced some of the steps. And then I read everything I could read, and we traded books back and forth, you know, and I mean, even obscure little journals that cost $165 I ordered on, and, you know, it's like, so we became John Brown scholars, if you can say that. And I think our first meetings, we were just trying to figure out what we're doing. You know, what are we saying? We love the book. How does the book work? Why is the book working? How does McBride use humor? Why do we care about this? Is it important? Is this an important work? Does it have, you know, relevance? And it obviously did. And we can talk about that in a minute. And then it was just a matter of breaking it down into, at that time, it was 8 episodes. 8 episodes. and the middle gave us a problem because there was some repetition in the book where things were happening, and then like Onion would say, and then we decided to go to Iowa, and then they're in Iowa, and the executives are going, why are they in Iowa? And I was going, don't know. Onion woke up and John Brown said, we're going to Iowa. So we had, and I remember we called McBride one time on a speakerphone, and we raised these questions about the middle part of the book. And he said, oh, you boys are in the dreaded middle. And it's like, right. yeah, we are, man. So we had to torque it and truncate it and find out what was right about the book. When I have done adaptations in the past, I was always advised, read the book, throw it over your shoulder, and then write your adaptation. But that was not the case here. The case here was like, it was almost an embarrassment of riches, but again, it's such an interior book. How do you dramatize what Onion, and that changed Onion a bit, where they were thrown off the train or jumped off the train. He was having all these doubts in his mind. And I thought, it just doesn't play. So we have him voice his doubts to John Brown, and it worked because John Brown now had to answer those doubts. That wasn't in the book. There's a lot of scenes that weren't in the book.
Sure.
That we had to, and it torqued Onion's character into a more defined, sophisticated, character, a person who had real original thinking.
And we'll get into the details of that in the spoiler section, but just, on this writing section, how long was your research period, would you say? And then how did you outline and break down the book? How long was that period?
Boy, it was fast. I mean, the reading, I was reading every day for months.
Okay.
Books. And then the outline, I had a great assistant who ultimately became in the writer's room, Lauren Signorino. And she came over and we just broke it down. The book actually has a natural break of 6. So to make 8 was not that difficult because the book had its own natural rhythm. One thing we did discover in the book, there's an opening section in where this church in Philadelphia burns down and they find this journal, and the journal is this book.
Oh, okay. It's like Onion's journal.
Yeah, it's Onion's journal. And I couldn't make it work. I just couldn't make it work. I couldn't ramp up to the tavern scene. So I called up James. I said, I don't know if this is important or not. He says, it's not. And I'll tell you why it's not important. He said, my book editor made me write that.
Oh, wow.
He said, the story actually starts where you want to start it. Because if you think about it, it's a love story between Onion and John Brown, ultimately. So let's start where they meet. That makes sense, not this ramp up stuff.
Wow. That's amazing that you're able to get rid of like some chaff, that was stuck in by a different editor, and that your story sense told you to get rid of it. Well, so then how long was your outlining stage, and did you use note cards, or did you just use like a Microsoft Word document or Final Draft document?
I just a Word document. I just typed up, 10 or 15 pages.
Okay.
Sent it to Ethan. He sent it back, sent it to Blumhouse. They gave us the usual thing, but it was the pressure, the time pressure worked in our favor because we really had to run and gun.
Well, so once you started, how many writers did you assemble as part of a writer's room? Because I know there was a couple episodes that you and Ethan didn't write, or at least one for sure. So how many other writers did you bring on, and then how did you divvy up the scripts?
I think it was like 4 or 5 writers. And you know how these things work. We let some of the junior writers have a first pass at it, and then it wasn't like they weren't good. It's just that we didn't have time to send them back and forth to the writer, so we'd let them have a pass, and then we'd kind of take it over. Okay. We just didn't, and they were great writers. It's not anything about their abilities. It was just like, we had a gun to our heads.
Yeah.
June was coming up really, really fast, and we didn't have any scripts.
So you started in March. How long did it take you to get your 7 scripts?
Like it was March. I think when we landed in Virginia in June, we had 5 or 6 scripts.
Oh, okay. So you pretty much were done. Close.
Yeah. And then when I got to Virginia, I wrote the rest of the season.
Gotcha. And then I would guess you did some rewriting as well.
On the set. I mean,
yeah.
Ethan and I, here's how we work. Monday through Friday, we shot. Saturday, Ethan and I worked on the scripts, and especially the stuff to be shot the next week. Then Sunday, we rehearsed in the conference room.
Okay.
So we worked 7 days a week, but we were constantly working. And I was, excuse me, one of us was Ethan and I, of course, he was on the set a lot, but there were some episodes he wasn't in. We took turns. But for example, the dinner scene, which is not in the book, I'm in the corner of that set, and it was such a bear.
You know, I'm going to get to that. You're talking about the Frederick Douglass dinner. I'm going to get to that in our spoiler section for sure. So we're going to come back to that.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But
it was just part of the process of getting it done.
Well, so tell me this. So when you sit down to write, did you and Ethan ever write scripts together, or would you send scripts back and forth to each other that you co-wrote? Were you ever like in the same room actually with final draft open?
Yes, but how it generally worked is that I'd write the script, send it to him. He had notes. I'd come back with it, fix it. Then we sit down together with 2 hard copies, and we go through every scene. And it was some of the most fun I'd ever had on a show, because he would come over to the house on Saturday, and if a scene wasn't working, then, I'd write something and he'd write something. Then he'd get up and act it out, perform and everything. And he goes, "That didn't work, did it?" I go, "Nah, we're still not there yet." So we had a lot of fun. And we had some good directors who let us play like that.
That's great. When you sit down to write, do you give yourself a page count to hit each day, or do you give yourself a certain amount of hours that you just want to be in your chair writing?
I never, that's a good question. All I remember is that it was push, push, push. There was not a lot of break in the writing time that we had to do.
Okay. And tell me about your budget and schedule. That's kind of like the last big question I have before we get to the spoiler section. What was your budget, and what was your schedule to shoot?
I never saw the budget. As you know, these things can be in flux at times. So I think it was about 60. And then what happened was...
So 60,000 per episode?
Those $60 million.
Oh, $60 million. Because I was going to say what? Okay, so $60 million for 7 episodes. That's fantastic. Because I mean, there is huge production value on the screen. Because that's why I had to ask. There's no way it's 60,000 per episode. No, huge production value on the screen. So that is just incredible.
I know. We were extreme. We had this guy John Blackie, who did Hell on Wheels. If you can build a railroad and railroad towns, and he was so innovative. One of the best things that happened to us as far as serendipity was that Andy Edmonds, who is head of the Virginia Film Commission, he was a junior member of the Virginia Film Commission, I think 10 years ago, when I was trying to get that Altman film made. So we got to be friends. So I knew him beforehand. We were supposed to shoot in Canada, and then something happened. I don't know, tax, whatever.
Yeah.
Then we were going to shoot in North Carolina. And then this was when they were not, I don't know, it was a transgender bathroom issue or something. And so people were boycotting. I don't remember politics.
Yeah.
We were kind of like adrift. Andy Edmonds is at the Austin Film Festival, South by Southwest, runs into Jason Blum and Ethan Hawke. They start chatting up. Good Lord Bird comes up, and Andy goes, "Hey, I've got a slot open in Virginia." And we're going, "Wow, Virginia, where this actually took place?"
Yeah.
The state of Virginia bent over backwards to bring us there. They gave us the incentives. They gave us 4,000 acres of state property that bordered the James River to shoot in.
Wow.
And part of that property had some old sets from Turn, and I can't remember the other one that had, maybe it was Turn and something else. Anyway, so there was a little hamlet already built of Revolutionary War. Blackie went in there and rebuilt it. Oh, and Harriet shot there. And so that church where we have our Harriet Tubman scene is the same church that they use in the other Harriet Tubman film.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And so
that was a great set. That was a great set.
Oh man, we were so blessed by that, and they gave us free offices. There was an old correctional complex in the corner of the thing, and we took that over. We had a gymnasium that we were using as a soundstage. I mean, it was like a gift from God.
Well, so okay, $60 million. How long did you have to shoot?
We started June 6th. I think we wrapped a little after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
I can't remember, Jeff. It's been
that's a big shoot, but I mean, you had a lot to do, so it makes sense. That makes sense. All right, so podcast listeners, YouTube watchers on the Backstory Magazine page, if you have not yet seen The Good Lord Bird, please press pause if you don't want spoilers, because we are definitely going to get into the story dynamics here and big scenes. It's on Showtime. It's WGA nominated for writing, rightly so. So I really hope if you haven't seen it, you go take a chance to see it. But here we go with the spoilers. So, right off the ground, I think one of the things that's interesting to talk about is just the dialogue, because it was utterly fantastic. And I know that sometimes you have the luxury of transporting dialogue from the book. I know also that, as you said, you became John Brown experts. So you were able to, pull from letters, I would assume, and speeches that he gave. Talk about putting the mentality of 1859 dialogue as something that could be accessible for television, because you kind of switch back and forth a little between, I wouldn't say modern vernacular by any means, but you simplified it enough that it's not like people are lost in the 1859 prose. So tell us about just writing regular dialogue, but then also culling John Brown's words from actual letters and speeches and stuff like that, because it was very well done.
Well, thank you. The credit again goes to James McBride for so much of that. But I got to tell you, man, when James and I get together, it's like I grew up with this guy. I mean, we know the same inside jokes. We tell the same type of rhythm, the way people speech. And, I think the Hell on Wheels helped me because I grew up watching Westerns. I know how gunslingers and homesteaders and people like that like that talk. And often for John Brown, he was such a religious zealot and prophet, and I'm an amateur theologian, so I knew that there were places where I could get away with a little bit of old King James, and just torque it a little bit. And so I was able to do that, and especially if I could torque it a little bit to make it sound like him. I mean, I was with Ethan so much when he was doing his character that, and if you're working with an actor, you kind of know what fits in their mouth, and that's helpful to hear him do when I was going, okay, here's how he's going. I'm going to write to his speech patterns, to his enunciate. I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I just try to. I don't know if I'm always successful, but I think that was a big part of it, was understanding. Oh, and you're absolutely right. When John Brown's youngest son, a spoiler, he dies in his arms.
Right.
That's not in the book, right? And then I read a letter, and it was at the bottom of the letter. His last words were, "Well, I reckon he's dead." And it just, oh my God! Now that's what he said. That's in no book. That's in an old letter that somebody said John Brown said that. And I thought, so reading as much as possible generated those gems,
Yeah, that's great. Well, so tell us this, what was the part that you had to leave behind from the book? What was the part that you, for as much as you loved it, it wasn't either going to work as part of your narrative or part of your schedule, but just something fun that fans of the show would love hearing about?
Well, I think the Harper's Ferry episodes were good. I think I would have liked to have spent a little more time in Harper's Ferry with the train. I mean, John Blackie built that train out of nothing, and it looks so real. He built that train tunnel out of nothing, and that's, you're at the end of the show, you're running out of money. I would have liked to have spent a little more time at Harper's Ferry, but as far as the narrative, and in the beginning of the show, there was more of a table setting with other characters who got lost in the editing room, weren't shot well, or the director wasn't on his game. I miss those things, but at the end of the day, it's okay. I think we're okay. And as far as the book itself, there's nothing. I mean, we had the luxury. We made up stuff, so
right.
We had the luxury of doing that. So there wasn't anything that we lost thinking, okay, well, we'll just lose that, but we'll make up something better.
Was there anything that you wanted to make up, right? Something that you wanted to invent that was something that you loved, like a left turn that you created that worked really well on the page for a while, but then was something you had to scuttle because of budget or schedule that you never shot? Because it's always fun to hear those left turns as well.
No, I have to say no.
Okay.
I'll probably think of one after we're done, but
here's one of the interesting things, and we talked about this a little earlier, is, people are tuning in to see John Brown and John Brown's world, but it is Onion's story, and there's vast stretches when John Brown disappears, as the narrative goes. Onion says, he would disappear for months. So how did you decide how long John Brown could be off screen?
That's a great question.
In an episode,
we had a lot of fun with that in either the second or third episode where we're in Pikesville with where Onion becomes a handmaiden in a brothel. And the good thing for me was that I had more time with Ethan, even though we were on that set all the time. And Kevin Hooks did an amazing job with that episode. I mean, it is just heartbreaking to me, or to us, when they're getting ready to hang that woman who led the insurrection. And I mean, she's so brave. And we figured I said, we need John Brown to come save the day, because so it's like John Brown had to come and save the day.
Right.
It's because it's not like it's a trope, Jeff, but it's just like, if the episode ended with the hangings, it's sentimental. We had to bust it open, and we busted it open in a kind of a funny way when John Brown goes, "You've been reading the Bible?" They're in a gunfight. You've been reading the Bible. A couple of things I learned was, and I think that the mistakes that were made in the shooting of the first two episodes ultimately were advantageous to us, because in our original conception of the first episode, it was going to end with the murder of the homesteader. Now, that's a hard place to come back from for a character. So when we had to cut a lot of the stuff at the front, we said, you know what? Why don't we just end it with John Brown riding off and saying, "I hope you guys find something to you're willing to die for." So in a weird way, it was one of those beautiful mistakes that turned out into something that was good, because we talked a lot about this. How can we redeem John Brown after, murdering some innocent people? Or they're racist, but it's not who he thought they were. It's very kind of complicated. So
you've really hit on it though here, because it's true that, the farmer, the homesteader, he wasn't politically motivated to be a slave owner. He wasn't interested in slavery or free rights. He was trying to just stay out of all of it as a farmer. Right. And it's not even clear his usage of slaves, because there weren't any that we saw, in the room.
He didn't have any.
Right. So he didn't have any. And we know that John Brown did kill some people that he just considered were sympathizers.
Yeah.
And
he was a sympathizer.
Right. And for as much as people like to revere John Brown, the whole key to understanding John Brown is that he knew that he was going to have to spill innocent blood to make the pathway that he wanted to make, no matter what. And that's a tough pill for anybody to swallow. So I do need to commend you, because that was something that I think that you addressed very early on in the series, when you're kind of hoping that he gets his better senses and doesn't execute this guy, but he's overcome and he definitely goes for it and executes that guy. So that's interesting to hear you discuss about kind of how you guys were wrestling with where that would fit into the show and at what point that would come, because it's definitely a key to John Brown. There's not going to be a clean way to his concept of emancipation.
You're absolutely right, Jeff. And I'm glad you brought that up because, as you know, being from Kansas, and you know probably so much more about John Brown than the average person, John Brown came from a big family of abolitionists. You know, right. John Brown's grandfather fought with George Washington, and they split up over question of slavery. So his grandfather was an abolitionist. His father was an abolitionist. John Brown was a peaceful abolitionist until his 50s. And what happened was his sons went down to Kansas to become farmers and homesteaders, and they were being harassed by the slavers because they were outspoken abolitionists. And John Brown got word that his sons' crops were being burned and there were threats. And there had been, from what I've read in a couple of books, there was a plan to kill John Brown's sons outright. So John Brown went down there to settle scores for his sons and to help his sons. And in that mess is how he came to kill some people who were involved in the plot to assassinate his sons. So, but we don't have time to talk about that in the show. So then if we don't have time to explain his motivations, then we're going to have to take it to a different place. We're going to have to come at it at a different angle. And I think that, and that was, I have to say, that was Ethan's, a lot of that was Ethan, because this was a problem we had. We can't discuss why John Brown is doing it. So it has to come out of his character. Well, then how does that work?
I mean, no, totally. And, growing up in Kansas, I was very aware of John Brown from a young age because, people revered that, they were on the right side of the war, whereas our friends in Missouri were on the wrong side of the war. But, as I grew up, I saw a lot of systemic racism in Kansas as well. So although Kansas was a free state, it was also, if you do some of the research, in certain communities, very begrudgingly free states. With red shirt sympathizers for the Missourians. And it's interesting. And I was actually I was wondering the whole time watching the show, if you were going to give any of John Brown's backstory. And I must say that I found it very interesting and unique that he does mention that in Exposition, I think in in episode 6 or 7, about like coming to the defense of his sons and how he got involved. So he does mention it. It is talked about. Was there ever a chance that it was going to be a flashback because his sons are characters in the show, or was it always just going to be Exposition?
No, it had to be. It was a tough call because, we all hate Exposition, but it was a tough call. So what we tried to do was put it in the mouths of the sons that he was riding with at the time, right? Where they were and not even put it in their mouths, but let them argue. They're going, you know what, Mom is starving. Or, this and that, and then it goes back and forth that way. But I didn't want, John Brown's backstory is not that pertinent to Onion's story or to Onion's point of view. I mean, it can pick up these things, but it wasn't the story we were telling.
I mean, it totally worked because, people are so invested in the character that you're really into it at that point and you want to know why. I think something that's really interesting to talk about John Brown as a character, though, and this is classic to cinema, is that you're essentially writing an anti-hero character because as an anti-hero, he doesn't, the only external force that you could really say that's a constant other than slavery as an antagonist itself, of course, the situation would maybe be Jeb Stuart, and the few times that they had run-ins together. But other than that, John Brown is generally his own worst enemy. And so, you see him unknowingly self-sabotage his best laid plans and the people around him as their loyalty to him, just the way that Henry becomes Henrietta, like they don't correct him. and they try and just go with it. And it's got, by the way, a very Uncut Gems energy was one of the ways that I was talking about it with a friend when we first watched it. Even though I know that you guys were probably in production before Uncut Gems came out, or you weren't influenced by it, but he's got a very manic energy. So tell us about the challenges of writing an anti-hero character like this, who is, consistently self-sabotaging.
It's a good question, and funny because Onion is the one who comments on this. He goes, whatever he believed. He was a real white man, which is like one of our favorite lines in there. But, you have to, what I liked about writing for John Brown was that here's a guy who is willing to give it all. And I had to remember that. In my writing was, here's a man who was willing to lay down the lives of not only himself, but of his sons for a cause. He was a, like I said, I'm an amateur theologian, but he was a real white Christian who just couldn't abide slavery, and what these are just some of the things I had to think about when I was writing his character, because the network, they're terrified of this white saviorism notion. And so I specifically wrote some dialogue in the series that he's not there to save the black person. He's not there to save the enslaved. He's there to save white people from their own mortal sin of slavery, racism, that. And if I remember that, that helps me a lot.
Right.
And
I mean, obviously he did want the slaves emancipated. He wrote his Emancipation Declaration.
But you're
right. He was fighting for everyone's souls in his own minds.
Right.
And the damnation.
Save the white people from their sin, and then they would release the people in bondage.
Right. And saving them from their damnation in hell, which is where he thought he was going. Well, so, all right, you brought it up earlier, Frederick Douglass. When you get to the Frederick Douglass scenes, you do not expect there to be a comedic break that big in a show like this. And obviously, John Brown himself is somewhat of a cartoon character at certain points with his just crazy outbursts. And, the Frederick Douglass stuff was great, but you're actually building an interesting structural dynamic in which Frederick Douglass is such a showman, that John Brown is learning from watching him speak, and they're friends, they're contemporaries. But ultimately it all comes down to the line that Onion decides that at the end of the day, Frederick Douglass was a parlor speaker, and John Brown was somebody that was in the field putting lives at risk to take this rather than to talk about it. Now, I say this in the context of the show. We all know in real life, Frederick Douglass did fantastic things for every American. His speeches are like gold. But there was an ego side to him, and it's very funny that one of the episodes starts off with a Frederick Douglass monologue saying that his goal is to be the most photographed man of the year, because he loved the publicity, and we see that. So tell us about writing those scenes. You were going to tell a story about standing off on the side of the dining room scene at Frederick Douglass's, but tell us about writing those scenes and also the dynamic that you introduce of Otelia, which is, I guess, his open marriage mistress, because his wife is very aware. So
we played. There's so many things to talk about in that scene. But he was at the time the most photographed person in the world.
Right.
And I was reading an essay about that, and I kept going. You know how people go, the camera loves me. Right. And I riffed on that, like, this device adores, so, and I think I wrote that in like 20 minutes. Sometimes you get these little things and it works, but we did break POV, but it was a teaser. So I thought it was okay. Frederick Douglass, he was a real person who was a great man who did a lot of great things. He did enjoy the sumptuous life. He did enjoy the finer things. He did enjoy female companionship. There was, talk about his wife and his mistress and this and that. And, the fun about that was that Onion was going, not only is there a man living in a big house with fine clothes, he has a white wife and a black, just so that was the fun of it. And so we were able to, these were some big discussions, and I had to bring James McBride in the writer's room to kind of like calm everybody down, that it was okay to make fun of Frederick Douglass, because it made him more human. What McBride does with his characters in the book is that he approaches them all with love. There's nothing vindicative of Frederick Douglass or anybody, and all of his characters are approached with love. Now, that scene is not in the book, the dinner scene.
Oh, okay. Wow.
As you know, Jeff, dinner scenes are like awful for filmmakers. I mean, no one wants to do them because there's impossible coverage. Sight lines are crossing. There's the choreography of, they're just awful. And it's just people sitting around talking. But we came to the place where we wanted to talk about the approaches to slavery in a way that wasn't expositional. And I think that what we found out was that, Frederick Douglass told him, he goes, you want to die for justice. I want to live for it, and that was a starting off place. And that Frederick Douglass's strengths were his oration and yelling at slavery, where John Brown was going to go into it with a gun and a pistol. Now, and let's talk about that at a dinner table. These are big topics, but is there a way to do it with fun? And no one wanted to do a dinner scene. So we said, let's write one, and let's write a really long one. I mean, the great thing about working with Ethan is that we were always challenging each other to do stuff people didn't want to do because, too much work, too hard. We had a great director, Darnell Martin, who was just fantastic. And she helped us get through that. And I was in the corner of the dining room the whole time, and we would, do a rehearsal, and, we do little fixes and stuff. So that was a scene. And I think the scene was either 12 or 19 pages, which is stupid. I mean, it's not smart to do.
It's so great. Like I didn't want it to end. And like I'll say that it even continues, because by the time that they're hatching their plan, of what Harper's Ferry is going to be, and they're arguing off camera. We haven't still seen it, but they're arguing off camera. And then Onion is trying to sneak some cognac. The scene continues, and both, his wife and his mistress both come into the room, and
farce now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a parlor farce by that point.
We had so much fun with that. Now, the parlor part is in the book, and it's a little darker than what we portrayed. Frederick goes a little bit farther with Onion than we depicted. We didn't feel the need to go that far.
Wait, like Frederick's picking up on Onion, kind of?
Yeah, it's like,
Gotcha.
And we had a lot of talks about that, and I didn't feel like we needed to do that. I felt like that may have been a bridge too far,
right?
Because we wanted to get away with what we were going to get away with at the dinner scene and the parlor scene, and that was plenty.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a suggestion of it. There's one point where he's pouring a drink for Onion, and you could tell he's getting a little flirty, but that's it. Well, so was Otelia a composite of mistresses?
No, I think he actually had, and I'm sure we'll get letters from scholars about this,
right?
But I feel like that I was less a Frederick Douglass scholar. I had some people on this. Erica Johnson was one of the writers on that episode, and I think she did an amazing job. And I can't remember if she was a composite, but yeah, he had real women of European descent mainly, who were, had the hots for him. And
his wife was kind of okay with it? They could be
I don't think she
traveling.
Was okay with it. Yeah, I don't think in real life she was okay with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that part seemed a little, laissez-faire, a little advanced for the time of the Frederick Douglass open marriage. But it was very well done. It was very funny. And, again, you're also dropping in, and maybe James was too, some dialogue that even conversational dialogue is culled from Douglass's speeches or writings. I could tell, And I thought that was brilliant because, he's trading with writings and speeches, dialogue with John Brown at the same time, during that scene. So I thought that was extremely well done.
But we cheated, man. We cheated a lot we stole left and right. And I will have to say that I think that one way we redeemed not ourselves, maybe ourselves, but with Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass had to make a dangerous trip down south to tell John Brown that he couldn't be with him.
Well, right. And
that was very brave and heartbreaking.
And that was a great scene too. And we'll get into that in a second. One thing I want to just talk about structurally is your use of titles. It was a really good way to just cut away, keep things going, show the passage of time. You always have big splashy titles like chapter marks in an episode. At what point did you realize you were going to do that?
To be honest, we had this brilliant editor named Pedrick McKinley, and that was his idea, I think. Okay. That wasn't anything that I had come up with, I don't think Ethan was involved in that decision either. But yeah, we had by the way, just to give credit where credit is due, fantastic editor in McKinley, just brilliant. Well,
the show moves. It cooks. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you about Backstory Magazine. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And folks, we recently published issue 42. It is packed with so much great material. You could check out our table of contents over at backstory.net. If you've never read us, you could test drive us. You could read an entire free issue over at backstory.net or through the iPad app. And it's a really good way to see who we are and what we do. Of course, we interview screenwriters, directors, actors, producers, comic book artists, and even playwrights. But one of my favorite things that we do is we publish unproduced screenplays by writers of note in our section called Off the Shelf. And in this issue, we have two scripts like that. We have Simon Kinberg. That's right. The X-Men Days of Future Past writer. We have his first screenplay that he sold right out of college. It's called Ghouls of New York. It's about grave robbers in the 1890s. I still think it would make a great movie. We have the entire screenplay for you to read inside the issue, along with an interview with Simon about what he learned on that script and how he would conceive it as a movie if he did it today, if that would ever happen. We also have another Off the Shelf by Joe Carnahan for his screenplay LA 57 that he co-wrote with his brother Matthew Michael Carnahan. Joe's been trying to make this for a decade. He's come close a couple times. I really hope he makes it. You will love this screenplay. You'll see the passion in it. And I think he's getting closer. I'm hoping he's getting closer. One of the things that Joe was nice enough to do was he gave us some concept art that he had gotten for his views of how the screenplay might get into a movie. But the script is just fantastic, and I know you'll love it as well, along with our interview with Joe about writing it. So I hope you'll check that out as well. Look, there's so many things to discover in Backstory Magazine. If you want to subscribe, we'd love to have you. It would be so great to have your support. You could use code SAVE5. That's save and the number 5 at the backstory.net shopping cart. And that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. You could also use your same credentials at backstory.net to log into the iPad app, but you can only use the coupon code at backstory.net. It also gives you access to anything new we publish, and we're already working on issue 43, but it also gives you access to our archive. And just a quick note about our archive, just so you understand it when you log in, we are constantly adding old issues to our archive. It just takes time. So right now you could read about issue 29 to 42 in our archive, and we're going to continue adding new older issues going backwards in time. But we're also producing new content, so we just have to have time to do both. And it is taking a lot of time, article by article, literally page by page, but we're doing it. So you'll see our archive continue to grow, and it's another great resource for you to have as a 1-year subscriber. But look, thanks for considering becoming a Backstory subscriber and spreading the word about the magazine. It really means a lot to me. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation about the WGA-nominated TV series, The Good Lord Bird, with co-creator and co-writer Mark Richard. So I guess as we're getting into, and we'll get into Harper's Ferry in a second, but the last thing to talk about is just this great sequence in Canada, meeting up with Harriet Tubman, and the speech he gives was just classic. I mean, it was a great scene. Tell us about kind of creating that scene and why you think that John Brown's alliance with Harriet Tubman wasn't more enriched, and he didn't see the value in going further with that. He definitely saw her as an ally, but if he gave himself more time, if he didn't rush himself, if he was better at planning rather than being so manic, it could have actually changed history and his plan could have worked.
Yeah, he was impatient. What I like about the Tubman scene and the Frederick Douglass scene is that that those are real. I mean, not those scenes are real, right. But Brown actually crossed with them. He was friends with Douglass. He knew Harriet Tubman. And people don't know that. I mean, John Brown is not well taught in our schools. I mean, in the South, we're taught that he was this bad guy. And up north, he's often not taught much at all, except as a footnote to, Harper's Ferry. I can't speak for why John Brown did that. It's just that he was impatient, and manic.
Yeah. I mean, it's too bad because that was the part of his plan that failed. The two watchmen that they could overtake at the armory, that was easy.
It all went wrong. Everything went south from the beginning.
But having no slaves to show up to get those guns, even though he didn't realize he could have just stolen all the guns and left the armory empty, was another thing he could have done. But he was really convinced that there was going to be a revolt, an uprising, and he didn't do the proper recruitment. That was the biggest fail of the plan.
His spy Cook, who was supposed to, that's a real character. And there's a great book I don't have somewhere. It's called A Spy in the South about Cook. He was a real guy and a complete screw up and a ladies' man. I mean, we gave him 10%. A lot of that is his fault. He didn't hide the bees.
That's true. This is something just briefly I want to talk about because you brought it up. I was so impressed you guys even got into it. I would have loved to have seen more, but I know it's getting into the weeds. You mentioned the Secret Six. And comic book fans would know the Sinister Six in the Marvel universe, but no, the Secret Six. And it was basically a version of what we would today call dark money, in which it was Northern abolitionists that had money that wanted to fund kind of racy missions that might end up in violence, which no one could decide before the Civil War if it was the right path to take, because can't we all just talk it out, right? Was the theory. And you mentioned them as him really wanting to go for funding, asking Douglass to go for funding. And I'm just curious what else there was about the Secret Six that you came across in your research.
They were not held in high regard by a lot of people because they were these people who, like you said, they put their money up, but they're not going to tell anybody, know? And we talked about maybe introducing one or two somewhere along the way, but we felt like that it was more economical to have the mention at the Frederick Douglass dinner without having, like you say, get into the weeds about the Secret Six. And I think that after Harper's Ferry, they completely disavowed any involvement with John Brown and the cause. So I don't know. They were kind of skittish, but Brown had received money from those guys before.
One of the things that was really impressive, aside from the big moments, was creating the little moments of tension, be it the guns rattling on the podium as John Brown is banging the podium. And you see that the pistol is cocked back, like those guns could go off and the preacher is just watching him, watching the guns slip on the podium and nothing happens. And even, looking for the bear, right? Looking for the federal that might be trying to get the bounty on John, during that and how Onion's, searching the room and kind of being very conscious of other people. Talk about kind of crafting those little moments as well as part of the big story. Is that something that you feel once the cake is baked per se, you have time to add those little icing moments, or did those moments come all about?
To give credit where credit is due, that's Ethan Hawke. Almost every single, because, he's an actor. He needs business. He needs, and sometimes we talk about it and sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes I'd watch the dailies and, like where he's holding up the rabbit or the turtle or something like that. Or he's like petting a horse's nose, or he just did it. And it was brilliant. I know we always talk to the director about it, but that's Ethan Hawke, man. He's a pro.
That scene leads into Hugh Ford stealing the money from John Brown. Yeah. Tell us what else there was about that. Was there any other details that came out later about stealing the money, just being a scoundrel, or was there any political motivation to stealing the money?
He was just a scoundrel, and that's a true story.
Right. No, I know that.
And John Brown was always getting hoodwinked. by people, just believing the best in people. Wasn't the first time or the last time that he lost money believing in people. But yeah, Forbes was a fun. We added the part where John Brown shoots the pamphlet in the hotel lobby, of course.
Right.
And then Ethan ad-libbed the line where he goes, "Canada's out the back door."
Yeah, so they could get out of there.
So, yeah, so another little bit that he threw in, it was great.
No, it was great because there's so many points at which things could have worked, and he's just so trusting. He hands over all of his money, and even Onion, the audience surrogate is like, wait a minute, let's save a little. And it was just another of many great moments. Using as many Bible quotes as you are, that sometimes could be difficult for writers to collate, because you got to have the quotes coming at the right time. And you're a deacon, as you said. So you have your experience. Tell us about kind of navigating that path for both John and really the anyone else in there that's trading Bible quotes. How much of it was in McBride's book, and how much of it, were things that you needed to add at certain points? There
was quite a bit in the McBride's book, and I tried to use them very sparingly because I think they put people off. And generally in Hollywood, it's the same Bible quotes everyone seems to use for, or they'll use the same song,
right,
Breaking in the Sheaves or Amazing Grace, or it's just like so boring. What I tried to do was have Owen, who is his son, when John Brown would ask one of his sons for a quote, Owen would just give some made up quote. It's like, look before you leap, before lest thou step in shit, stuff like that. So we tried to have fun with it and keep it. Sometimes I felt like I would try to write a John Brown speech that was motivated by a piece of scripture, but the scripture wasn't in the speech. And
interesting.
What I mean by that is, and I did it twice that I remember. Owen is asked, "Why is your father over there praying?" And Owen says, "A man who doesn't consult God before he carves a stone cuts his hand." Or it's not in the Bible, but it sounds like it is,
right,
know. And or when John Brown. I don't know, there's a couple instances like that. So I would take something that felt like it was a quote, but really wasn't a quote, something we made up, but using the quote as a base.
Well, it's interesting because it is devastating when Frederick Douglass has to come tell him that he's not going to fund it. It's like a real breaking point. And, a normal person might reassess and replan and realize that they still have time. There doesn't have to be this rush, but John Brown always had an urgency to him. Tell us some of the things that you noticed that were just going wrong with the plan, because it seemed from that moment forward, every single thing he did was a mistake. And it was all because he was rushing rather than just taking his time to methodically plan a little better.
Well, and also he deviated from his own plan. I mean, even though his plans were bad, he would deviate from bad plans. And, he left too early. And, even his sons were going, we can, like you suggested, we can steal the guns, go up into the Alleghenies and hide out. But he was waiting for the bees to hide, which weren't going to happen. What was fun was that in the final scene when he's talking to Onion, he goes, "I deserve to hang, not because I've been fighting for slavery, but because I stayed too long in that wheelhouse." It's like he goes, "I screwed up, and that's why I should hang, because I messed up my plans." Thought that was, he finally takes some sort of accountability for all the mistakes he had made. But he did believe that God would pull him out, and it kind of worked. It kind of didn't. He was happy in those last days in jail.
Right. Well, because he was bringing notoriety to the cause. He was forcing it to
letters. He wrote. I don't think he slept for days. He was writing so many letters to so many newspapers, and was, because they were going to bust him out. There was a band of guys who were getting together and they were going to break him out. And we mentioned that in a small way with Onion, saying maybe we could. And he's going, no, but there was a plan. And that's why the Virginia militia and all those guys were called out, because they'd heard there was a plan of, guys coming in to break him out. He didn't want to be broken out. He said, "This is my destiny. to be in this cell, to hang for this cause, to get my word out. And he was just writing. So he accepted it.
It's interesting because they give the $500 to the railroad man, the conductor of the actual railroad. He was going to help bring in slaves, but they didn't have enough time. They moved up the deadline, which screwed up everything. And John Brown was just so out of his mind. He couldn't see that you need time for word to spread and to get people, motivated and to leave. And I'm just curious because, Onion says that he saw people get out of the train that night, even when there was the shooting. And, it's not exactly known how the shooting happened or why the shooting happened. Tell us about that kind of little fuzzy part of history and what you learned there. And were there other people that were ready to go to John Brown's aid? And once they saw how bad the situation became, they realized that they shouldn't.
Well, it's true, Jeff. And there were people on that train who were going to join. But when they saw it starting to go bad, they left. And you asked me earlier if there was something that I missed. And I guess I understand why the studio and the network didn't let us do this. But what they did to those people in the Harper's Ferry that they caught was brutal. If they would catch one of John Brown's men, they would shoot him. One of the guys was disemboweled on the street, and they threw him into a hog pen, and the hogs ate him. And
I was going to ask about that because that's very well known. Was there a reason why that and some of his trial wasn't in the studio?
Thought it was too far, a bridge too far. They just,
really?
And Ethan and I really had strong opinion about this because we were going, you're pulling your punches a little bit. So you can't win all the battles, man.
Right. Well, was there ever going to be some of the trial, or did you see that as a redundancy?
The trial was not an Onion story.
Okay.
I think that's where we kind of came out of. And, I read the transcripts and all the pieces about it. It's not, trials really aren't that interesting unless they're, I don't know. Well, of course, Aaron Sorkin would disagree with Trial of Chicago 7, which is interesting trial, good writing. But yeah, it took us out of the Onion world because Onion was not allowed near that courthouse. Onion, we wanted to stay with Onion. He's the main character of our story. And he gets his little information bits that, Brown is alive. Killer Mike gets to take him in to see him. We needed to keep that focus, and that helped me make decisions about whether we do trial or not.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, there was so much to do, and obviously, when you're in a world like even Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, in which that you're embellishing history, but you're also taking real facts, real dates, real movements, and you're twisting one thing. Like in Inglourious Bastards, no, there was not, Nazi night at the Cinema Palace where Hitler died in a revolt, and there were definitely covert teams, but there wasn't the bear Jew that was like going around with a bat and had this legend. So it's just interesting to see how people can creatively play with history and bring shed light on it in new and different ways. Do you think a student in 2021 who stumbles across your show would walk away with a pretty fair version of who John Brown is, regardless of the elements that you invented, because so much of what you did was historically centered on fact?
I've never been asked that question. Yes and no. I'll say, this is why I say yes and no. To this day, Jeff, people don't know, was he a zealot, a murderer, a prophet? Who was this man? And I think that's one of the things that appealed to me as a writer, to write about someone who's unknowable. And I think a student may come away from this show and having seen the murder in the beginning, have the scene, the hanging in the end, all the stuff in between. I'm hoping the student would get a sense that this is an unknowable man, but extremely important to our culture and to our country, where right now 150 years after the Civil War, this country still hasn't really had an accountability for slavery.
No. And that's why we're still in the same situation. I mean, it was no surprise that the insurrectionists, January 6th, were running around with Confederate flags. You know, the lost cause, as they call it. Well, it's called the lost cause because they lost the war.
Well, it's funny you say that, because when we shot in Richmond, and I hadn't been in Richmond in years and years, and I was with Kevin Hooks, the director, and we were driving up Monument Avenue where, you know, there's Robert E. Lee, Jeff Stewart, everything like that. Or as a friend of mine calls, Boulevard of Second Place, you know.
Right.
But, and I was looking at it through his eyes because he I could tell it made him uncomfortable. And I thought, my gosh, these statues are still up. And I'd always, and you know, I was raised in Virginia, but it's almost like you see them as part of the furniture. You don't really pay attention to them, you know. So I think that's why our show is relevant at this time. You know, it's like, what are we doing here? Can I just say one thing?
Please.
MLK Day, for about like 25 or 30 years, I always send out letter from Birmingham jail to my friends for them to read Dr. King's letter. And it's something that there's a section in that always indicts me. And everyone should read it, by the way. It's one of the best documents in American literature or history. He said that it's the problem with racial equality. It's not the KKK. It's not those guys that are in the militia. It's the white moderate, because white moderates are always championing peace and order over justice. And I think that's what we're in now, in an era of that. We were in an era of that with Dr. King. We were in an era of that in the Good Lord Bird. And, you know, if I remember that letter, and that especially that section of the letter, it makes me not pro-violent, but more pro-justice, you know, looking at unjust laws, looking at and I'm not getting on my soapbox here, but I'm just saying that I feel like that's one reason our show is pertinent right now.
Well, I mean, it's a call to action. And how far will you go to defend your ideals? And that's the problem. And those monuments you're talking about, you know where they don't have monuments like that? Nazi Germany.
Well, he's always, you know, he's just going, there's no statue to Rommel in Berlin.
That's right. Even, you know, Rommel is still studied in U.S. military academies. OK, he was a brilliant general. No one's going to deny that. But you're absolutely right that there's no monument to Rommel. And, you know, they lost that war. And it took the entire world to stop them for the second time of perpetuating, you know, their Aryan beliefs of what a perfect world would be. And that's why, you know, there is no monument to Rommel. So the fact that we allow it, the fact that here in this country, when, you know, we have a war that was very settled, you know, there was a very distinct end to it. And it was and the end to it wasn't because the South almost won, but they gave up at the last minute. They were pummeled into submission and they lost. Atlanta was burned to the ground.
The best thing that ever happened to Atlanta was to be burned to the ground and to be rebuilt.
That's right. And so, you know, the other great American tragedy is what happened during the Reconstruction, when we were trying to see how we could live with free African Americans in this country. And it was something that ultimately led to, as we know, the creation of the KKK and the prominence of the KKK, because they started very quickly. And you know, racism took its way again with the swanning for the lost cause and the days of old. But if you decode days of old, it's not heritage, it's hate, because it's the subjugation of other people in slavery. So I mean, like, yeah, like we're in a very lost time right now. Now, the good news is these aren't the majority of Americans. There's still a minority of people that are the lost causers that are really trying to, again, take up arms against the government of the United States and change the course of the country. But if we don't do anything about them, we are going to continue to end up in a more divided time, just like, the divided times that led up to the Civil War. I'm in no way saying that we're going to end up in a civil war here, because
no, but it's fascinating because those statues went up years and years after the war.
That's right.
And Divvy Diggs has this interesting theory, and I don't want to misquote him, but because we were all of our African American actors were downtown having to drive past the statues every day, and we were always talking about it. And he said, I think that those statues were put up in, I'm not quoting right, but as a form of denial. The stages of grief. That's the denial stage is when the statues went up. And then they never came down. And
they're still in a state of denial. I mean, poll after poll, Republicans can't really tell you who actually won the presidency. They're still believing in the big lie. So it's just,
you know what?
It's crazy.
I don't know what to say, man. I do know what to say is that I feel like our show was honest about these things.
Yeah.
And I think that it was a dangerous project for the studio and the network to engage in. And, my hat is off to them for seeing it through. I know we had some disagreements along the way, but, kudos for them, seeing it through.
No, of course, one man's rebel is another man's revolutionary, another man's freedom fighter. So it's like, that's the classic battle of perspective that you see in Good Lord Bird, right? Yeah. Because, he is regarded as a terrorist by the red shirts, without a doubt. He's come into homesteads and killed innocent people. So I mean, like, it's hard to call him an exact hero at times because of behavior like that.
And that's what's so brilliant about it. His complicated nature was what excited me.
Right.
And I think sometimes my disagreement with the studio would have been that they wanted a more earnest biopic. And I'm going, that's not what we're doing. We're not doing, that's death. So
that makes sense. Well, so, editing is the last stage of storytelling. What was something during the edit that, a cut scene that you really liked, but you understand why it went, and maybe there's a lesson in it?
I think early on when Reverend Martin's crowd rolls into camp, that was a much longer scene, and I miss a lot of that. And Jew Wiener, who was one of the sidekicks, we had some great scenes with that guy. It's like you got this Jewish guy riding with John Brown, which was true. And it's like, I would love to have had more of that.
Tell us some of the scenes that were cut with the Jewish guy.
Oh boy. He just, I can't remember all of them, but he had with Adam Shapiro was the actor who was amazing. And, he's just in it a little bit. And also one time there was a scene where John Brown gets blown up in a creek with a cannonball, and he has this comic look on his face. And we cut that for, little tiny, nothing you're going to miss.
Okay. One of the scenes that I want to come back to that I thought was really important was in Pikestown, because that was such a, moment for John Brown, but the writing and the editing, especially of, Shabona with the preacher and her talking about how she was ready to kill the preacher. I mean, that moment of Shabona and the preacher and her talking about how she was ready to kill the preacher, ready to kill his family, and she wouldn't hesitate to do it, shows that angst, in which the preacher said that he was a man of the Lord, but was, still figuring out small ways to enable slavers. Tell us about the challenges of writing that scene, which was just really a fantastic scene and moment that is, again, strangely away from our protagonist. Like, yeah, Onion's looking on, Onion's witnessing it, but John Brown's not there, and it was a really a heck of a scene. So I'd love to know anything more about it.
Well, she had the capacity to indict Onion, because he was the one who inadvertently betrayed the scheme, because he wrote the papers. So that put him in the scene. Now, the scene between the preacher and Sabonia, a lot of that's in the book, and I was able to go off of that.
Is there a historical basis for it, or was it something that was kind of a compositive problem?
I think that's a James McBride.
Okay.
construct.
But it's beautiful. I mean, it's perfect.
Shot. That's another Kevin Hooks episode. He's a brilliant director.
It was a perfect scene. I mean, like it was really one of my favorite scenes.
Heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I think I wrote the ending of the scene where he says, hang her then, I'm done with this town.
Right. No. I mean, it encapsulated a lot of how white preachers would try and use the Bible to justify slavery, but, miss the book of Moses, maybe about, the liberation of slaves and stuff like that. Little parts just didn't make it into their.
Well, he wasn't a bad guy per se. I mean, he was one of those well-meaning guys,
right?
But just didn't have the juice. And he was a fantastic actor. As well.
Great scene.
It was a good scene. But again, the director and the actors deserve like most of the credit for that.
Well, I know we're starting to run out of time. So tell me about your toughest scene. What was the toughest scene as a writer to crack that you kept coming back to over and over? And how did you creatively rise to the challenge? What was that scene that really you weren't sure how you were going to make it through it? You were maybe even avoiding coming back and rewriting it, but eventually you had to battle it.
Well, again, hands down, I'm sorry to be redundant, but the dinner scene.
Okay.
It was tough, man. I was sweating bullets, but I will tell you, at lunch, everybody broke for lunch, right? I'm up on the second floor of this big house where we're shooting, and I'm scribbling on the sides. And Darnell Martin, the director, is skipping up and down the hall. She missed lunch. She can't wait to get back into the scene to direct. And I said, "Are we okay?" And she was going, "We're great." And it's just like, "Oh, thank you, Darnell." You don't know sometimes. You just don't know.
Wow,
because we're in the weeds or what. But like I said, we had great and we had so many actors who, when they found out we were doing this in New York, wanted to be on the show. The word was out. So that made me feel good too. Is that, Divvy Diggs and, Orlando Jones, they wanted to be in the show.
Yeah, they were fantastic. I mean, Divvy as Frederick Douglass was such perfect casting, man. But you said you wish there was maybe
didn't want to be another historical figure after Hamilton. I mean,
I know.
You talk to him.
It was brilliant. But you said you wish there maybe would have been an episode 8. You might have done some more stuff with Harper's Ferry. What's some of the more things about Harper's Ferry that you would have put in there?
The brutality.
Okay.
I think by eliminating the brutality, you don't do service to what these people had to go through and what they went through at the hands of these white residents. I mean, but maybe it was tonally off. I could be wrong. I don't know. I go back and forth about that.
Okay. That's fascinating. Well, what's next? What are you working on next, Mark?
Oddly enough, or not oddly enough, I'm working with James McBride on his new novel to adapt that came out last year, Deacon King Kong.
Okay.
Set in a small black church in Brooklyn in the 1960s. So it's fun to get, and then we're going to try to trick Ethan into doing something with it so we get the band back together.
Oh, that's great.
But, yeah, it's fun.
That's awesome. Well, look, yeah. I absolutely love what you did with The Good Lord Bird.
Thank you so much.
You and Ethan and your entire writing staff, your WGA nomination was very well deserved because it's a brilliant show that was just a lot of fun to watch. So congrats again on that. And thanks for being so generous with your time.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us. This has been a lot of fun.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to co-creator and co-writer Mark Richard for being so generous with his time and discussing his WGA nominated TV show that he's co-writer and co-creator of, The Good Lord Bird. And folks, honestly, go track this down. If you have Showtime, make sure to go see it. You can watch it in the Showtime Anywhere app. You can watch it through your cable box if you're a subscriber. The Good Lord Bird is excellent television. I know you'll dig it. And the racial tones and themes that you see in it are still very relevant today. So it really has an impact, and I hope you seek it out. And speaking of things to do while you're surfing around online, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue in the app or at backstory.net. And if you like what you see, you could become a subscriber, and I'm willing to give you a code to do so. You could use coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Spotify and iTunes, and also my YouTube watchers at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, to become subscribers to Backstory and support my passion project. Thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. And you know, folks, if you want to get a hold of me, you could find me running the accounts for Yo Goldsmith on Twitter. That's me, or Yo Goldsmith on Instagram. You could also find me running the Backstory Magazine account on Twitter, which is Backstory_mag. And I run the same account on Instagram, which is Backstory_mag. I have a Facebook fan page. I don't use it that often, but I use it sometimes. And you could check that out as well, the Jeff Goldsmith Facebook fan page. I'll try and get on it a little more. If you want to email me, you could always reach out, yogoldsmith@gmail.com. I promise to not respond immediately. I always say that because it's true, but I will try and get back to you when I can. So you could always reach out there as well. I'm an easy guy to find. Look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.